Okay, let's dive in here. We're going to do a deep dive on older donors. I want to warn you up front that there is a lot of content today. This sort of genre of webinar is actually my favorite when we look at generations and how they behave. And it's my favorite because we can sort of look at history and use that to predict the future. So there's a lot. We will send the recordings and the slides after the fact because sometimes I might speak a little quickly, and so I'll try to avoid that. But just a little warning here. Quick housekeeping notes before we dive in. CFRE approved. Please fill out the survey at the end of the webinar to confirm your participation. So please do that. Even if you're not sort of on that path right now, it's worth doing so that if you decide in the future, you have that optionality. Here's the agenda, not super important, but big note again that the recording and the slides will be sent around after the fact. Okay, let's dive in. My name is Patrick, super lucky to be the co-founder of FreeWill alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny, and lucky to work alongside an amazing team, which is closing in on $7.5 billion raised for charity. Love these folks, and more than 1,000 nonprofit partners, including many of you. So a really big thank you to you all. And then one sort of get the new year started gift. We love to give away books, generally a big reader. And so we'll give this away to 20 people. This is a great book by Carol Dweck on mindset. It is some of the most important sort of mental research around success and happiness in parenting, in relationships, in school and business, everything else. Love this book, totally worth reading, giving it to your kids if they haven't read it, giving it to your coworkers if they haven't read it. So we will make a note in the survey. So don't put your address in now. We're definitely not going to copy that down. But we'll make a note in the survey if you'd like a chance to get a copy and just tell us where to send it. Okay, so happy New Year. We asked you all how you're feeling, and you can see, wow, really big increases in terms of how people are doing, which is great. It seems like end of year went really well for a lot of folks, which is also very exciting. You can see this blue line is happiness, that yellow orangish line is anxiety. So people are feeling pretty good across the board. Actually, happiness is close to the highest it's been since Valentine's Day in March last year. So pretty cool. How confident are people about hitting their goals? Boy, by the end of last year, people were feeling a little down, and then boom, we're right back up. And I think that people had a surprisingly good year across the board. So congratulations to you all. That is not unnoticed, and we know fundraisers are busting their butts to make this happen. So great work to everybody here. All right, so we're going to dive in on older donors now, roughly 65 plus. When we asked you how you sort of describe these people, generous, passionate, engaged, loyal, dedicated, more conservative, people wrote that, more traditional, faithful, active, involved, supported. Pretty cool. Some old school, a little bit of disengaged, some stuff there. So we will dive in on that. And then we asked you what percentage of your donor base is over 65? I mean, check this out, right? So half, that big yellow block, half said half to three quarters. And then 13% said 3/4 to 100%, right? So older donors really freaking matter to all of you. Even that 31% said 26 to 50%, and almost nobody said, boy, sub a quarter. So if you're serious about fundraising in 2023, it means you have to be really, really good at this demographic. So hopefully this will help. Let's talk about older donors for a second. We're really looking at two generations here. By the way, this is just all relative, right? So you're not old if you're a baby boomer, but you're older than millennials and Gen Z. First category, silent generation, born 1928 to 45. These folks are 78 to 95 in 2023, right? So really on the old side. And then the baby boom, the epic baby boom, 1946 to 64. These folks are a shade short of 60 in 23, all the way up to 77, right? So we're really easing into retirement ages for the entirety of the baby boom soon. And this is a really big deal. This population is getting really big. So 34%, it grew more than a third over the last decade to 52 million people. And we'll talk more about how wealthy these people are, but it's enormous. So I want to do a really quick quiz to sort of help you get your head around where all these people are. So first question, what is the ratio? We're going to answer this in the chat. What is the ratio of 76-year-olds to 86-year-olds in the United States? Right? For every 86-year-old, how many 76-year-olds are there? 2 to 1, 2 to 3, 10 to 1, 5 to 1, 3 to 1. All right, lots of guesses. We'll give you one more second. Someone just complained about math, but you're doing great. All right. A couple good answers. 9 to 1, a little high. The answer is about 3 to 1, right? So there are 3 to 1 76-year-olds to every 86-year-old, right? So that means, why does this happen, by the way? Yes, people are passing away, but also it's the case that fewer 86-year-old fewer people were born 86 years ago than were born 76 years ago because of that baby boom. And so you really see the dominance of the baby boom showing up. All right, we're gonna play one more. What is the ratio of 47-year-olds to 63-year-olds in the United States today? This is all US Census data, by the way. Okay, these guesses are all over the place. So you can, it's hard to keep track of what's what, but okay, cool. So let's reveal this. The answer is about 0.9 to 1, meaning most people don't expect this. There are more 63-year-olds in America than 47-year-olds in America, right? Because Gen X is smaller than baby booms still, right? Still, even as some folks in the baby boom population pass away. This is because there were many more people born 63 years ago than 47 years ago. Why was that? Two big things. The most important thing is that the people born 47 years ago, their parents weren't born during the baby bust. The second is sort of the advent of modern birth control in many families having fewer kids or not having kids at all. So take a look at this, right? Births per 1,000 women, right? Which is how a lot of demographers sort of treat this, 1,000 women, 50 to 44. You can see 1935, Great Depression, not a great time to have kids. 1943, a lot of enlisted men, people sort of childbearing age, men of childbearing age, child siring age, whatever we're going to call that, off to war, not around. Everybody shows up in 1945, comes back from war. Babies are born 9 months later. That's how babies work. And you have this enormous population boom, right? That's why we're calling the baby boom. It is especially dramatic, right? People sort of forget how big this is. So now when we look forward at how many people are of different ages in America, you see that 85 group, very, very small right now. That's the silent generation, growing as the baby boomers move into that cohort. You see how big that orange chunk is of 65 to 84 compared to where it might have been 20 years ago, 18 to 64, and then our sort of under 18 folks staying pretty flat. So this is pretty interesting. And then before we dive into this a bit more, I just want to talk about a framework for older donors to help us think about this holistically. So I put this thing on the left here because we need to think about a group of donors less by age and more by generation or birth year. And the difference here is between playing bridge and having knee problems. So I grew up and I got to go, my grandparents lived in a wonderful place called Cumberland, Rhode Island, which is right next to Woonsocket, sort of right on the Massachusetts border. And they loved playing bridge, right? They just loved bridge. And what I thought when I was a child was bridge is something that old people play. My grandparents were the oldest people I knew. They played bridge all the time. And it's not quite right. You know, they were playing bridge when they were 18 years old. And they were doing it socially when they were 28 and when they were 38 and 48, et cetera, their whole lifetime playing bridge. It's not something old people did. It's something that people that were born in the late 20s and early 30s did. And they continue to do so over time, right? And now the people born in the 60s not playing bridge a lot. Yes, some of you are, but you know, you go look at the numbers of bridge players in the 1970s and it's enormous. And things like knee problems, right? Knee problems are something that old people have regardless of when you were born. So when we think about older donors, it's important not to lock into your brain your view of what you saw older people do in the past, because a lot of that is cohort and not age, right? Being able to walk less quickly, that's a factor of age. But when Gen Z and millennials are going to be 80, they will be playing Call of Duty in nursing homes, right? This is something that's going to happen, even though it doesn't really jive with our current view of older donors. By the way, a couple of people said backgammon. I love, play a lot of backgammon. All right, so some shared facts here. Let's dive in, right? Remember, this isn't just older donors, it's people that happen to be older right now, but they were born at a certain time. So generations, much more religious, right? So 80% of boomers, 90% of silents identify with a religion compared to just 35% of millennials. That really changes giving habits. They're less educated. I mean, people forget that only 15% of silent generations have a bachelor's degree. Only 25% of boomers have a bachelor's degree compared to 40% of millennials. So that's really interesting. They are more married with more children. Many are now grandparents. 67% of boomers and 83% of silents were married when they were 25 to 37, compared with only 46 of millennials, right? It's just sort of the social norm. Obviously, things like the absence of the pill play a role here. 58% of baby boomers were mothers between the ages of 20 to 35, compared with only 40% of millennials. They also had more kids, right? This picture, by the way, is my own parents who are baby boomers and got married at 22 and 21, which in my mind is still insane, right? I don't have any millennial friends that got married that young. And they were, youngish for their generation, but not totally outside the norm. So some pretty interesting stuff there. Other things that happened, right? So let's sort of like step into the shoes. If you're not, some of you may actually be this age, but if you're not, let's sort of step into the shoes of folks who are in their 70s right now. Right? So their childhoods were shaped by the Cold War and McCarthyism. They grew up amid the civil rights movement, cultural shifts of the 50s and 60s. They fought in or they protested against the Vietnam War, depending on their age and politics. They were the first to see innovative technology like color TV, cable, internet, the first iPhone, right? These folks had black and white TVs when they were, 5, 6, 7, and then moved into iPhones and AI by the time they're in their 60s and 70s. It's pretty remarkable, right? So let's just actually really dive a little bit deeper into the life of a 66 or 76 or 77-year-old person, right? So they're 76 years old today. What does that mean? It means they were born in 1947, immediately after World War II ends. At age 5, they're 5 years old. They would run these duck and cover drills around the nuclear war during the Cold War. And some of you have seen this. There's this little turtle, animated turtle that sort of like does this whole duck and cover thing about diving under your desk if you see a mushroom cloud. Pretty wild. Age 16, right? So you're sort of politically aware for the first time. You've got color TV, and Kennedy's assassinated. So, millennials had sort of 9/11 as one of the signature news events of their upbringing. The equivalent there is the Kennedy assassination. 21, Martin Luther King is assassinated. So a second, enormously meaningful moment worldwide. 22, we walk on the moon, right? Only 15 years after color TV shows up. The Vietnam War starts with the draft. Woodstock happens. 27, Nixon resigns and the oil embargo is underway. So you have some real economic depression through the 70s. But then at 37, right, these folks, again, black and white TV, now first Apple Mac computer is 37. At 46, America Online, many of you remember that little dial tone situation. AOL gains popularity and the internet goes mainstream, right? And so this is a really important point, right? If you only remember, one thing about this, they are 46 years old when the internet shows up, which means these folks are going to be much more tech savvy than 76-year-olds 10 years ago. They are in their prime working ages when the internet shows up, when email comes about, et cetera, even if they know how to use a fax machine. And if you're, younger millennial and Gen Z, like you probably have no idea how to use a fax machine. Age 54, 9/11 happens. Also, cell phones are becoming ubiquitous. Age 60, the first Black president is elected and the first iPhone is released. 68, the Supreme Court rules in favor of gay marriage. 73, the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Really sort of attacking this group in particular. 74, the first female vice presidents inaugurated. You know, if you're a woman who was born in, what do we say, 46, right? You went your entire life without seeing a woman in one of the two highest offices in the land. And that's what it is, right? So that's there obviously a lot of other stuff happened, but those are the things that shaped who you are. And so what happens then is we also shape lots of things, but they tend to shape giving. And they are the most charitable generation in terms of total value. They make up 61% of all contributions, which means, by the way, that if you don't have a strategy for these folks, you don't really have a fundraising strategy. All right, they prefer giving to well-known, respected organizations. 45% of boomer donors research an org before making a gift. 85% are loyal to specific causes and loyal to specific organizations, which is different than when we talk about millennials. Millennials care a ton about causes and less about specific institutions. Boomers sort of get more tied into a specific institution. When we look at what they prioritize, you can see local social service and worship and health and emergency relief. These are the top four, right? And so what doesn't show up here for maturers as much animals, and then you see in Gen Z, for instance, worship drop in way, a lot farther down. Worship also drops for Gen X before going way up for millennials. Really interesting stuff there. Pretty cool there. All right, so that's sort of older donors when we look backwards. Now let's talk about what's happening in the world right now that's shaping how these folks look in 2023. So the first is we have this just enormous shift towards technology, right? So we talked about how in their 40s, the internet showed up. Email showed up. A lot of these folks would have had Palm Pilots, for those of you that remember these things. I remember my dad bringing home a Palm Pilot and just being totally fascinated by it. And so in 2014, only half of adults over 50 own a smartphone. In 2020, this was 86% for folks over that, 81% for folks over 60 to 70, 62% over 70. But this is remember, these are our last available data. This is now 3 years ago. So we're looking at 80% of these folks owning smartphones. And COVID really accelerated all this, right? They're checking email, they're engaging on social media, they're performing online searches. Those of you that have been in our writing sessions know that about 80% of email is now read on phones and not desktops, which really changes the way that people are behaving. Other thing we're seeing is they're doing everything online. And that includes major and planned gifts, which used to not be true. So online giving went up by 9% in 21, has increased by 42% in the last 3 years. And then 28% of these gifts are made on mobile devices, which is just a huge leap forward. This is 21, remember, right? So we're always looking at backwards data. We don't have 2022 data yet. And so when you look at what 2023 is going to look like, we're probably at a 20 or 30% increase from 2021. 2018 study by Blackbaud, again, now this is, data's 5 years old, showed that 54% of boomers prefer to give online over direct mail. That was 5 years ago, right? That number is now probably 80%. 34% of boomers reported things that are, little farther afield, GoFundMe, social media. So this is really the adoption curve that we're seeing. What else is happening? They're more and more likely to go online now for complex giving, stock, QCDs, donor advised funds, right? This mirrors the behavior where now they're going online for mortgages, for healthcare, for life insurance. Things that all used to happen offline are now just shifting entirely online. At FreeWill, we work with a lot of companies on qualified charitable distributions, and I'm sharing this so I can share some research. We have an easy way to make these gifts, and when people put these links to qualified charitable distributions on their website, they generate 4 times more than any other type of average, any other type of medium, right? So having the complex options for older donors on your website is one of the most important things you can be doing. We'll talk more about that in a second. All right, let's keep diving in here. What else happened? Second trend, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 radically changed how older donors give. Why? It doubled the standard deduction. What does that mean? Oh, sorry, one more thing. It also capped itemized deductions for state and local taxes at $10,000 a year. And it's not here, it capped the deductions you can take on your mortgage. Now, mortgages and state and local taxes are the things that drove the most people to then itemize deductions. So what happens now, right, since 2018, more taxpayers get bigger tax breaks from the standard deduction than doing individual itemizations. Look at the shift here, right? So overnight, from 2017 to 2018, 30% of people are itemizing deductions, and now 10% of people are itemizing deductions. So all of you have all that direct mail that says, hey, make a tax deductible gift. Yeah, sort of, but only if people are in the itemization camp. So now these folks are looking for other tax savvy ways to give, and they're really hunting that down. The other thing we're seeing, this is new legislation that happened end of last year. And just wanted to shout out our friends at the American Heart Association who've done a ton of work to push this. So if you guys are on the call, just hats off to you, and maybe people can send you some thanks. So Legacy IRA Act was part of the omnibus bill. What this means is it allows seniors to make a one-time gift towards things like a charitable gift annuity from traditional IRAs. And over time, it will increase the amount donors can give in these qualified charitable distributions to account for inflation. So these will become more valuable each year. We'll talk a lot more about QCDs in a second. Other things that happened in the omnibus spending bill, it raised the age of required minimum distributions, which means when you have to start taking money out of your IRA from 72 to 73. Why? Because some people are working longer and some people have longer life expectancies. So we want to hold on to this. Generally a good thing for seniors, but it doesn't change the minimum age to make a QCD. And so this gift stays eligible for folks over 70. And these are one of the fastest growing types of giving, along with donor advised funds from this group. Why does this matter? Because those of you, remember we asked at the beginning of the call, what percentage of your donor base is over 65? Now that's an important question, but it also matters how much money these people have. And what we see as we look at this sort of progression of time is that wealth is getting highly concentrated among older donors. Now that's because they were able to save early and live through enormous economic booms. And so their assets and they're really grown over time. But look at this, under 40, right? Sort of hanging tight. Now, some of that is that fewer people are under 40. So this is population and money, right? Over 70, look at that. We're trending up to 30% of wealth held for folks over 70. And then the big cohort of boomers, I mean, look at that, almost 50% held between 55 and 69. Those are all, almost all boomers, right? A couple of years, the very oldest Gen X there. 40 to 54, nosediving. Now, why is that happening? Not necessarily these people are all worse off. It's because boomers are leaving that bracket and going into the 55 plus bracket, right? And so this is where the money is. And it's where, I mentioned it's sort of where it's grown. I mean, look at the average net worth here. Sort of younger folks, 2035, from 98 to 2019, that stayed level. From 98 to 2019, at 36 to 51, you see a pretty big jump here. Excuse me. But then look at that jump from 52 to 70, right? The average net worth is now over $1 million as of 2019, and you can bet that went way up over the last 3 years, right? So that the asset growth really benefited that cohort. And so this is where the money is. This is where we need to be really attuned for. You can see also, right, means and medians, that's 65 to 74, right? The heart of the baby boom, median net worth 266, average net worth 1.2. And you can see how big that is across the board. All right, let's dive in some more, right? Why did this happen? They invested heavily in real estate, stocks, IRAs. They benefited greatly as the stock market and the housing market improved. Boomers own 44% of real estate wealth in 2021. This is another reason why planned giving is wildly important. People cannot give you shares of their house, right, during their lifetime. They could leave the entire house to you, and that house in Westchester or outside Boston or outside DC or outside San Francisco is worth a ton of money. Poor stock market performance in 22 may have some impact, but actually what we see is that giving goes way up in good years and then slightly down in bad years. So generally, we're in pretty good shape here. And many of you, I remember, surprisingly good Q4s. Older generations have never had so much wealth in the history of America compared to other generations. And so that is why we need to get really, really good at this. All right. The other big trend is that where that money is going from a plan giving perspective is being decided right now. So an estimated $70 trillion is going to be passed on from wealthy older generations over the next 2 decades. Those folks are deciding where the money goes right now. A lot of it's going to go to Gen X and millennials. These will be your next biggest donors. We will do a big deep dive on those folks in the future. By 2030, millennials will have 5 times more wealth than they have today as this money is being inherited. But about 10 trillion could go to charity. There's a consulting group called Cerulli. They said, hey, where's all this money going? And they said, okay, a bunch of it's going to go to other baby boomers. A lot of it's going to go to Gen X. A lot of it's going to go to millennials. And then a ton of money is going to go to charity because there's just so much wealth to be distributed. When we look at wills created on FreeWill, which is now the #1 estate planning tool in the country, you can see over time, there's just more and more estate planning, more and more of it's happening online. And it's pretty astounding across the board. And then one other note, because we often talk about plan giving. Plan giving, there was sort of this small note in that word cloud where a lot of people thought, hey, older donors are overwhelmingly white, particularly plan giving donors. And this is historically true, right? Plan giving has been historically dominated by white donors. And why is this? Well, what we see, there's some really good research on this, that Hispanic and African-American donors in the United States actually have a higher stated interest in plan giving than white Americans on average. And yet they tend to be underrepresented in plan giving donors. Why could that be? Well, and for African Americans, especially high interest in giving to religious causes, right? That's what the research shows. The gap, excuse me, the gap is the result of a lower likelihood to have an estate plan at death, potentially due to legal access issues. And so there's a collective role in the plan giving world to make sure that there's widespread access to estate planning in order to help close this gap. So let's chat now, right? So we know all the things that are happening in the world, and sort of the history of these older donors. We know the trends that are affecting them right now. And so what are people like you doing about this to actually make the most of this moment? When we look at, remember this, right? We looked at what percentage of your org's fundraising comes from donors over 65. And look at this, almost a quarter said 3/4 to 100% of our fundraising comes from this cohort. Everyone else said 50, 50 plus, small group 26 to 50, and then, very, very few folks 0 to 25. So it's clear that getting this right means getting fundraising right across the board. So primary channels, email, 84%, direct mail, 84%, phone calls, events, social media, video, text messages, none of this is surprising. We think you are texting your donors too little. We'll talk more about that in a second. All these donors text. It's a great way to reach out to them. They would love the contact, right? And this, I mean, one-to-one text to your major donors, but we'll talk more about that in a second. Then we say what, this might be the same thing. Then when we say, what are the primary gift types you market to 65 plus donors? We looked at what you said, and also we saw some of the same responses last year. So I want to share how things are shifting. Well, 73% said, hey, we market a lot of cash, but that's actually down. People are realizing more and more that cash is sort of the least valuable gift to get. Major gifts, about the same. Bequests, there's a big rise in bequest marketing, right? Of 5%. QCDs, 42% of you are marketing these as your primary gifts to 65 plus donors. Last year, that was 27%. So you see a huge shift here. Donor advised funds, same numbers. Last year was 27, this year is 42. So the big emphasis is going in these two areas for donors: stocks, charitable gift annuities, charitable trusts, crypto. Not a lot of crypto to 65 plus crowd. All these are relatively static year over year, except bequests are up, QCDs are up, donor advised funds are up, cash is down, right? This is the smart play. We'll talk more about this in a second. These are the gifts that are going to be transformative to your organization. And the cash gifts are sort of matter less and less every year. All right, so let's talk about being successful here. What are the paths to success? One is, remember how tech savvy and how much time these people are spending on technology. So they're increasingly online. 73% of, almost 80% of boomers are on Facebook. We need to be engaging with these folks across multiple mediums. Websites, this is where they go first, right? Remember, this is the researching organization. They have more time on their hands because many of them are retired. They are learning, they are making gifts this way. Social media, they are spending a lot of time on social media. Events and in-person calls, text messages, and direct mail, right? We're not ready to give on direct mail yet, but more and more of this giving is happening online. For social, right, we can engage these folks with Facebook advertising, target by location. Retargeting website visitors is sort of an underutilized tool that is relatively cheap and very highly effective. And then if you have email addresses, you can also use those to target folks on Facebook. Again, cheap and underappreciated. Do not forget to text your donors. 94% of donors over 70 text on a weekly basis. They would love to hear from you, and you will generate a lot bigger gifts this way, right? These are one-to-one text messages to your wealthier donors, right? To your major donors. You also need to make sure your website is up to date. And by that, we mean do not skip out on these high impact types of gifts on your website. QCDs, stocks, donor advised funds, plan giving, right? Everything needs to be there because this cohort is now looking there for these gifts. And they may give a $10,000 QCD to somebody else and give you a $100 cash gift because you're not front and center that you take these gifts. With our partners, we found that linking results in 2 to 4 times as many gifts on average, just by the simple action of putting it on your website. Put links to QCD gifts on your website. It is one of the best things you can do in January to help hit your goals over the course of the year. 2, focus on education, right? Remember that these non-cash gifts drive success. The analysis of 1 million nonprofits by our dear friend Russell James showed that orgs taking only cash gifts grew by just 11% over a 5-year period. Any non-cash gifts grew by 50%. Appreciated assets grew by 66%, 6 times faster. If your organization does not have a plan in place to get non-cash gifts, this is your year to get them in place. Most of these non-cash gifts are held by older donors. DAFs, stocks, QCDs, crypto, that's for younger donors, real estate. You need to have a plan in place in order to not just hit your goals, but be in this fast growing cohort as opposed to this very even cohort that you don't want to be in. But many of our older donors, they're smart people, but they're not always aware of the most tax-savvy non-cash giving methods. In fact, in the 2022 report, 96% of nonprofits said donor awareness on QCDs was not sufficient and needed to improve. This is not just QCDs. It's complex gifts like like stocks, like plan gifts. Donors do not know enough about this, and this is your job to help them get a bit smarter. All of these result in better tax savings for the donors and larger gifts for you. Just as a reminder, and I know we're being redundant here, the fastest and most effective way to increase giving levels from someone, right, to get more money from the same people is to change the way they give. Please make sure you have a plan in place to do this. The other thing we're seeing is that most giving happens towards the end of the year. But if you wait until then to educate donors, you actually end up missing out. So we found that FreeWill partners who emailed about QCDs 3 times over the course of the whole year in 21 saw a massive boost in giving at end of year. And the same is true of gifts of stock. So you need to be educating people starting in January, and then around tax season, then in the summer, and those gifts will start to trickle in and then become the flood at end of year. Take a look at this, right? So we said, okay, how did you do if you sent 0 emails about QCDs before end of year? If you sent 1, if you sent 2, okay, now we're seeing a big increase. And then if you send 3, things are off the charts. 3, else I'm showing 4. 3, off the charts. People need to hear repetitively about the education about these gifts, and then it clicks, right? So this is really, really important research that you should all know. This is going to be true about stock giving as well, right? Or even about donor advised fund giving. It needs to be repetitively shared about these smarter ways to give, and you'll see just wild results for your organization. When we think about this, right, it's also true of plan giving, right? We know that seniors are thinking about estate planning more than ever. And we know that consistently educating donors is the most impactful way to shift their behavior here. Sometimes people say things like, hey, Patrick, I want to talk about plan giving. I'm scared to send a plan giving note to my 85-year-old donor. Is that going to make them feel weird? And the answer is, do not be scared. And here's a couple of really effective messages and framing that we've sort of discovered and tested. Even if you plan to live to 150, you still need a will. Get started today, right? And this is sort of tongue-in-cheek, like, you're probably not immortal, get on this, without sort of, being too serious about it. Other effective messaging to older donors: supporters of our humane society, or whatever it is you are, from 18 to 88, choose to include us in their will or trust. Would you like information on how to join them? And this messaging that's clear that we're talking to the entire adult population in our donor base makes people feel more comfortable, more communal, and actually drives a lot more behavior. So these two pieces can really solve that problem. And then the third, we'll talk about this more in a second, going big on QCDs, right? This is the best type of gift for many older donors. Older donors are where all your money is. Older donors are where all your donors are. You need to get good at QCDs in 2023. Qualified charitable distributions, AKA IRA charitable rollovers, fastest growing type of philanthropy over the last few years. For many seniors, this is the single best way to give, and we're going to dive in on why right now. So what are these? They are gifts out of an IRA, not a 401k, but most people who are older have rolled over their 401k into an IRA, so do not stress about that. They are also known as IRA charitable rollover gifts. Money is transferred directly from an IRA account to a 501c3 charity, not a donor-advised fund, not a private foundation, not a 501c4 lobbying organization, not a political action committee, a 501c3 organization in the US like you. Donors must be 70 and a half to give a QCD, and they can give up to $100,000 annually tax-free. This is going up over time with inflation, which is good news. And a big driver behind these is what are we called required minimum distributions. So if you're not familiar with these, at a certain age, now 73, the government says, hey, this money all went in tax-free, right? You guys are making contributions right now to your 401ks in many cases. That money is untaxed. The government says you have to pay income taxes on it at some point, whenever you take it out. Even, by the way, if you inherit an IRA from your parents, you still have to pay income taxes on that because no one ever paid income taxes on that money. And so these RMDs say, the government says, you got to take out X amount every year. It goes up year over year, et cetera. But qualified charitable distributions will help you meet these required minimum distributions. And by the way, they're the only way to get money out of an IRA tax-free. Why does this matter? Because there is $12 trillion. There is so much money in IRA accounts. Why is this? A couple reasons. Boomers started investing a long time ago. That money's grown. Also, in the 70s and 80s, right, when boomers were beginning to save, you started to see the shift away from pensions, not everywhere, but generally away from pensions and into retirement plans like 401ks and IRAs. And so, look at how little money is in IRAs in 2000s, right? $2.5 trillion, still a lot of money, a lot less. And you can see how that's grown so much with the population, with the stock market performance, and with that collective shift decades and decades and decades ago by employers from pensions to IRAs. What you see here when we ask donors about, nonprofits, are these gifts going up? And 85% said they got bigger in 21 over 20, right? So these gifts are on the rise because there is so much money in those IRAs. So really cool way for you to get more gifts from this population. These work, as I mentioned, because IRA money is always going to be taxed, even if the donor passes away. Post-tax money is much more valuable to the donor and should be conserved. So you are doing a kind service to your donors by helping them give QCDs. Over the last 3 years, there's been almost a 400% increase in the number of gifts that our partners have received. The average dollar value of these has gone up by 35% in 21. We're still calculating 2022. We'll have those numbers for you soon. And outside of FreeWill, nonprofits reported a 67% increase in how many gifts they got for the same period. right? So really remarkable. Why does this matter? We talk about that 70 and a half age, super important. 10,000 people, all in the baby boom population, 10,000 people become eligible every single day. 70,000 people will become eligible this week. 300,000 people will be eligible this month, right? So this is a new way of giving for all these folks, which is why education becomes so, so important. When we asked you how well your donors understand it, decent numbers said moderately well. Nobody said very well. Some people said somewhat, some people said not at all. And so there's a lot of room to grow here, right? Building the habit of QCDs becomes incredibly important because these are gifts that can become annual recurring gifts, right? Once people see the value in a QCD, they can do it year over year. And by the way, these gifts will be much bigger for you, right? So they're saving donors money on taxes and they're getting you bigger gifts, right? So super, super valuable. How do we put this in action? One, start outreach early. The first dollars that an IRA owner takes out count towards their RMDs. So if they don't need that money to live on, they should make their QCDs before withdrawing any funds themselves. It's really important. This will prevent them from adding to their taxable income. Ensuring your donors know about the benefits of QCDs early in the year will help them be more strategic with their giving. You also don't want to be second to asking for QCDs, because if that money comes out in January and the RMD is already satisfied, you might be out of luck until next year. So it's really important to start early here. When we ask people, right, again, the outreach is so important, right? You can see how valuable it is to do at least 3 pieces of outreach about QCDs. This is just so, so, so important. It's sort of the single most definitional thing around whether you'll be successful or not. Other things to note, right? When we do this, it needs to be on our website because so many 70+ donors are now online giving, which was not true 15 years ago. These gifts are 4 times more likely to come through this way as anything else. And we want to bring this up in every conversation with one-on-one donors. That is super important. And as I mentioned before, those that did it at least 3 times, right? Doesn't have to be wildly complex. 3 emails over 365 days saw a massive boost in end of year giving. This is really important. Really good example here on Southern Poverty Law Center of putting it on their website so they can give. Super, super important. This is a really good example from St. Mary's College about a great postcard that allows them to just sort of let donors know about this. These are really, really well received. Donors are so grateful for education because this is important for any of their giving to you or to somebody else. Tip 2, in mass appeals, right? If your donor base, has 2/3 of the people over 70 or half the people over 70 in every mass appeal, just put a little PS like this. If you're 70 or over, you can join supporters to make a gift out of their IRA. Here's a link, right? If this is most of your people, please make sure you're serving them, right? Strategy 3, make sure we're educating donors. Remember that donors are way more confused than you think because it may be totally new for them this year. Even if you said my donors know it really well, there's a bunch of people in your donor base that are turning 70 this year that don't know it really well because it's totally new to them. You want to understand the key paths for different custodians and be able to walk them through it. We've seen that the average time to find the right forms is 25 minutes, which is a giant pain. And so we want to run trainings for gift officers, a lot of the MGOs are more confused than you think, and make sure that everybody's up to speed here. Here's another example of one of our partners that uses a really clear tool to help people take QCDs and generate gifts here, just to make it really, really simple for donors to navigate, right? And this is linked to from the checkout page, so that you don't want a donor to give you $50 in cash when they could have given you $10,000 from an IRA. Last thing I'm going to note here is a couple of advanced tactics for you. Many people take QCDs at the same time every year. Follow up with previous QCD donors before what we call their QCD-versary, right? That means if someone gave you April last year, then in late March, we're reaching out and saying, hey, you made this gift last year. We'd love for you to consider doing it again, because a lot of people are on the same financial planning cycle, and so you can't miss that. it is also important, right? We talked about how this money is going to be always taxed, which makes IRAs one of the very best estate gifts to charity. Ask QCD donors whether they want to learn more about making you a beneficiary. Most donors also don't know that they can make recurring gifts through QCDs, but it's very easy to do so, right? It's often a checkbox on the form. So anytime someone's making a QCD, you can say things like, hey, recurring gifts make it much easier for us to plan and do even more, have even more impact with your gift. Plus you can cancel any time, right? That sort of messaging is really powerful to get people to switch that type of gift. Okay, so that is a lot of information. Let me share a little bit of resources here, right? So my wonderful colleague, Amanda, is going to drop a survey into the chat right now, I think. And in that, right, if you're interested in getting one of these gifts, one of these books, thanks, Amanda. That link is now in the chat. So this is the survey. It would be a huge favor to us if you take 60 seconds to fill it out right now. One of the things in the survey is the chance to win this book called Mindset. We love it. We think it's sort of foundational success in marriage, relationships, parenting, business, etc. And so we'd love to send you one. Please fill it out. Really awesome stuff. Other things in the survey, just make a note if you'd like this. We did a really big deep dive on trends in QCDs in 2022. So make a note there. And the other thing you can do here, if you like, is, we would love to work with you all. So FreeWill is a great fit for organizations of about 1 million plus in contributions or 5,000 email supporters. We're also starting to open up the aperture a little bit to slightly smaller organizations. If you're a little bit smaller in email, or think about 500,000 plus in terms of individual contributions, we'd be delighted to work with you. We work with 1,000 organizations, including many of the top ones in the United States, and we learn so much from each other that it's really fun. So if you're interested in chatting that through, just make a small note there. We can really help with things like we drive more planned gifts than any organization in the world. We do a lot of work making QCDs easy for small donors, for older donors, stock gifts, and crypto. We're also really deep working on some really cool new tools on donor advised funds that I cannot wait to share with you all. So look forward to that in a few weeks. And that is it. So we're going to do some quick Q&A, probably just a minute or two, and then we'll wrap up. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. And if you haven't already, please fill out the survey because it's one of the most useful tools to us to understand what we can do better, what went well, what you'd like to learn about. And speaking of what you'd like to learn about, other folks really said, man, the thing that I really want to know more about is effectively stewarding my donors. We have a lot of good donors. How do we steward them in an increasingly busy world, in a year with potential recession? And so in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we're going to do a session on tapping into donor psychology for really effective stewardship. And so we'd love to have you there, just so you can make a note to RSVP for that in the survey as well. Okay, so let's do a couple of questions and then we'll give everyone a few minutes before whatever they have at 1 o'clock Eastern. Quick questions. Stephanie says, who is more likely to give online, silent generation or boomers? The answer is boomers. Thank you for that. That was a good, quick question. Carrie, is the concentration of wealth in current older generations different from past generations? Yes. So baby boomers are some of the wealthiest generation ever. Why is that? There's more of them. They lived through extreme economic growth, right? So the houses they bought in the 70s are worth a ton. The stocks they invested, in the 80s are worth a ton. What else happened? They're more educated. And so that allowed them to take advantage of things like globalization and increased productivity. What else happened? Well, social change meant that women were in the workforce. So if you're in a heterosexual marriage of 2 people born in 1900, one person is working and earning a paycheck, right? In many cases, not all. If you're born in 1960, you have a lot of 2-income households, which is a lot more money. And remember, these two people often have bachelor's degrees. And so they're investing in the 80s, and then that's growing, right? So you have a ton more money here. In fact, boomers are wealthier than the silent generation ever was, right? So this is not just an age thing, it's a cohort thing. Kathleen, would you recommend putting the information about QCDs under plan giving, ways to give, or both? I would say the answer is both, but for the most part, it's under ways to give. It is a real-time gift, right? It is a thing that people will do instead of giving cash. The other thing to do is put it on your donate page. When you're asking people to donate, that's the moment where they should see I can make a QCD. Beth, can you explain why it's to a donor's advantage to make a QCD at 70.5 when they don't need to take an RMD until 73 now? Yes. Remember, this money is always going to be taxed, even if you pass away with it. And so taking QCDs earlier lowers your RMD down the line, lowers your tax burden down the line. Also, if you're going to pass them on to your heirs or somebody else, it also reduces their tax burden. Right? You want to preserve post-tax money and give pre-tax money away. Liza says, is it true that DAFs are not eligible for QCDs? Short answer, yes. You cannot give a QCD to a DAF. Janet says, do you recommend that QCD gifts have a different type of receipt that doesn't reference tax deductibility of the gift? Janet, this is a great question. Yes, these gifts are not tax deductible. They avoid tax, altogether. So it's not deductions, it's sort of a decrease of your income, which reduces tax across the board. So you want to have an acknowledgement letter and a thank you letter, but you can't say, this gift is tax deductible. Great question. All right, well, let's pause there. So we have, a bunch of other questions, but want to give everyone a second before the next meeting. And so let me just end with saying a huge thank you for joining. I mean, this is just an unbelievably important topic. And so the fact that you're pushing your own knowledge, pushing your organization in order to better hit your goals this year is a huge credit to you. And then second, just want to say Happy New Year again. So glad to be part of this community and everything we have to do together. So hopefully I will see you in a few weeks for stewardship, and have a wonderful rest of your January, and talk to you all soon.